Hey everybody, how's it going? Dan Schinder here with
Steven Schinder.
And our guest again being invaded once again by Stephen Lambe, awesome author, journalist, somewhat of a fellow Yes fan as well. And we are here to talk about his new wonderful book, all about 90125. Stephen, welcome again. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. Great to see you guys. Great
Thanks.
to be back.
You as well.
Yeah, so this is Rock Classics, Yes, 90125. And I heard a rumor that it was going to have a different title. You know, is it true that it was originally going to be the ISBN number and then that changed and you released a new one? I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Yes.
I'm wondering where's Steve going with this. We didn't talk about this. I didn't know about this. And now I'm looking for the number. There it is.
Yes.
Wow, imagine 51895. That would have been funny in parentheses under it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's the US price, basically.
Yeah. I want to say, first off, it's a great read. In my case, listen. I'm an audiobook guy. It's hard for me to make time to sit and read. And so Stephen, my son Stephen, bless his heart, he usually will read a book, record it for me just for our own purposes, and then I can listen to it while I'm doing other things. But he didn't have time to do that. But he just got home last night from being out here with me in Arizona for a week because we saw John Anderson a couple days ago in concert. So he read the book to me, and I kind of felt like maybe I'm digressing, that our youngest reading me the book. And what's next? An adult diaper, maybe? I don't know. But one of the biggest things I want to say to people about the book to encourage them to get it and read it is that we've all heard a lot about the album. We've all heard a lot about the stories, since this all went down and happened. There's a lot of myths and legends surrounding the circumstances of this what I think is a great album. And what I got from the book is I expected that, okay, I can finally kind of hear all these things together, strung together in a chronological order. It is that, but it is so much more. Like, you really dug deep and you got so much more out of the interviews you did with the different personnel. Tell us a little bit about how your perspective of how the process went as you were putting this all together.
Well, you mean the process of writing the book? Well, a lot of it, first of all, it grew out of an article I was asked to do by Prog magazine. So that's the front page of the magazine.
Awesome.
So this was at the end of last year. So and it was a cover piece, so it was a long piece. So thankfully, during that process, we set up interviews with some of the main protagonists. So and also some of the interviews happened because of other things. You know what it's like when you talk to these guys. You don't really talk to them unless they need to talk to you about something. So you don't get access to Trevor Rabin unless somebody's got something to sell. So I spoke to Trevor last year because he was doing interviews for his Rio album. And we got to speak about, but also we did a whole career retrospective at the time. So as well as talking to him about all kinds of other stuff, I spoke to him about 90125, of course. I'd spoken to John a few weeks before because he was promoting some concerts he was doing with Paul Green's Rock Academy in the UK, in London last year. And I specifically wanted to speak to Phil Carson as well, because I think people don't really realize how important he was in the process. And that was a me thing. So I sort of said, can somebody find me a contact for Phil Carson? Luckily the guys at Prog have a lot of contacts, and they did, so I approached him. I would have loved to have spoken to Trevor Horn, but didn't at any stage, unfortunately. But we do have really good information from Trevor Horn's autobiography,
right?
Which by the way, I can heartily recommend. That is an amazing read, and if you listen to him reading it to you as well, that's really good as well.
Yeah, I did the audiobook, and it's fascinating to hear him literally tell the stories. It's a great listen, great read.
So that was the process, and I did this piece for Prog, and then I thought, well, I'm doing this, I run this publishing company, so I can expand it into this new series we're doing. So I then did that. But what I wanted to do was try to piece together. There's always been so many gaps in the narrative, sort of certain things we don't know. And we can't talk to Chris Squire or Alan White about it, unfortunately.
Right.
So we have to piece it together from other sources.
Yeah.
So doing that was quite difficult. There's huge gaps in the fossil record, and I wanted to try and bridge some of those gaps if I could. And also there's some not disinformation out there. I mean, there's a little bit, particularly when we talk about Tony Kaye, but there's some contradictions I wanted to try and drill down into as well, and particularly about Owner of a Lonely Heart. How that came to be on the album and who wrote it, and that kind of stuff.
Right.
So that was the whole process, and then the idea being to piece it all together into what I hope is hopefully a fairly readable narrative, with some other bits as well. So that's kind of how I approached it, and then it was a case of expanding it to like sort of 30,000 words from the 7,000 words it was previously.
Yeah, so, here's something I'd like to ask both of you, actually, because I haven't asked Steve this, but I think one of the biggest discoveries that popped into my head from your book, Stephen, is really Phil Carson's role. My question to you both is, do you think without Phil Carson's role or certain elements of his role that this came so close to just never seeing the light of day? Had this never seen the light of day, would there ever have been any continuance of Yes? I mean, there's no way for us to really know about it, but it's amazing the impact. He really is the savior in this story, I think. Yeah.
He'd already saved Yes once. Or that's what he says, because when Yes were dropped after the recording of Time and a Word, he got them undropped.
Yeah.
So he'd already done it once. I'm not quite sure how much of this with Phil was genuine love for the band and how much of it was commercial expediency. It's probably a mixture of both.
Sure.
So I think he saw that Yes need not be dead. So even from the word go, when he first brought all these people together, and it was him that did it. It was him that linked Chris Squire and Alan White with Trevor Rabin.
Right.
He brought them together when Trevor Rabin was all at sea. When he didn't have anything specific to go to, having lost his development deal with Geffen. So it was Phil that brought them together. He said to me that from the word go, he wanted it to be Yes. He didn't want it to be Cinema. He wanted it to be Yes. But he needed to let the guys find that for themselves, really.
Oh, interesting.
But that's understandable because, firstly, he loved the band. And secondly, as he said, and it's in the book, it's much easier to sell an established band than it is a new one.
Sure.
Yeah. And with music and even with movies, a familiar name, which basically a brand, it does help sales. Whereas trying to go with a new name, even if it's with some well-established people already, it can be a little bit of a tougher sell. I think that Yes could have still reformed maybe later, like late 80s or mid 90s, but this definitely accelerated the process. And like as I think you mentioned in the book, like 90125 added some more fans for the band. They're the ones who came in for the 90125 songs, and then they went back and listened to the prog stuff. So that makes me wonder, like, how different would the audience turnout be, even if slightly?
Yeah, I think they would have been preaching a bit more to the converted already. So they might have come back in the late 80s, as you say. This is all, completely hypothetical. but they might have just been another version of the prog Yes,
Right.
sort of playing to whoever is left of their old prog fan base.
Right. Yeah,
So
I could see that.
that's, you know, maybe not. Maybe they would have done something else. It's
Yeah.
very clear also that when they first started rehearsing in cinema, they wanted to be Asia. So Asia were a year ahead. They'd seen Steve Howe with Asia, and they wanted to do something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Something a little more accessible. And I'm curious, Stephen Lamb, during the process, what was the most surprising thing you found out or pieced together or missing link you dug up? Was there something that really surprised you?
Oh yes, I think probably I was very fortunate to speak to Tony Kaye late in the process, and I hadn't spoken to him when I did the article. So getting his perspective on, you know, how much of the album he was involved in and what he wasn't involved in was I wouldn't say it was an eye opener, because I don't think there was anything that especially surprised me about what he said, but just to get some clarity on that kind of stuff, because there's always. If you look on Wikipedia or if you read Trevor Horn's book, there is an implication. It doesn't say it directly, but that, for instance, that Tony Kaye plays some electric piano on "Owner of a Lonely Heart." That's kind of received information. It's kind of almost accepted. It's part of the zeitgeist now. Tony Kaye said to me that did not happen. He is not on "Owner of a Lonely Heart" at all. That they did not record any of it whilst he was recording the album. So he was not involved in "Owner of a Lonely Heart" or "Leave It" in any way. It's always possible he's misremembering. You know, it's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And he's, you know, he's the same sort of age as John Anderson. So he might be misremembering, but you can only go with what people actually say to you.
Yeah. You know, that's such an interesting point, because from our perspective, you would think someone would remember whether or not they played on such a hit. But through following,
so, you know.
yeah. And through following other musicians, you know, that we're fond of, it's funny to me when I hear them say, yeah, I don't remember, when it's referred to something that happened during the recording of an album. But to them, it's like I heard Jimmy Page say once in an interview, someone asked something and he said, that's like asking me what did I have for breakfast on Thursday, February 22nd in 1972. He said, I don't remember. And that makes sense, you know, put in that perspective. Yeah. The one appalling thing that I got from the book, and I guess I had heard this before, but it just stuck out again, that the fact that some people actually think that Tony Kaye was miming on stage during the 90125 tour just blows my mind, that people actually could think that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's stupid, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Any of the footage, it's really clear he's playing. I think I toned down some of the things. Here's, well, not an exclusive. I toned down some of the things that Tony Kaye said to me personally when I put it in the book, because he was quite critical of Casey Young, because his implication was Tony thought that some of the stuff about him miming came from, not deliberately from Casey Young. I don't think he ever said that, but Casey Young was trying to, you know, pick up a girl at some point and said, "Oh yeah, I'm the keyboard player in Yes," and that grew into this conspiracy theory that he was the only keyboard player for Yes, and that Tony Kaye's miming on all the stuff.
My gosh!
And I may need to apologize to Casey Young for that, because I didn't speak to him for the book, and I have no idea whether that's what actually happened. But Tony Kaye was very defensive about the whole thing. You know, if you hear Casey Young talk about that whole period, and I believe all that stuff. It's I played the keyboards under the stage. I was playing the keyboards under the stage because the stage setup was already done. He started off just playing some vocal enhancements and vocoder, and his role gradually grew during the course of the year he was on tour. Talked to Tony Kaye, and Tony Kaye will say to you, he was just my keyboard tech. That's all. Yeah, and he played some stuff under the stage, and that's all. But Tony, he's understandably very defensive about it.
Yeah.
This whole conspiracy theory thing has really got under his skin, by the sound of it.
Yeah, that makes sense that would wind him up the bigger that myth became, you know.
Yeah, but it's not absolutely nonsense. It's,
Yeah. The other thing about the book is that that whole area of the book brought me back to seeing that tour and how excited I was to see this new Yes with this new music. And I wondered what old stuff would they play. And you gave great perspective on that. And I think one of the nicest things, you know, Chris Squire living up to the nice guy that he's always been talked about and perceived as, is how Trevor was a bit, concerned about playing the old songs, and Chris encouraged him, make them your own,
Yeah, yeah. I
that's
think
really
Chris.
nice to hear.
I think Chris is two things. Well, the main thing here is that he's very charming, and he can convince people to do stuff that they don't really want to do. He certainly did that with Trevor Horn more than once, I suspect.
Yeah,
and he certainly did that with Trevor Rabin. If you talk to Trevor Rabin loved Chris, absolutely loved him, like a brother. He said.
Yeah.
And I get that completely, but Chris could really hit people with that with the charm, and he'll give. So, though it's nice that Chris said that, I think there's a certain amount of, look, we need to, buried underneath that, there's a certain amount of, look, we need to get this done. What's the best way of getting this done? And the best way of getting it done is to give Trevor Rabin a certain amount of agency. Also bearing in mind they had Tony Kaye in the band, so a lot of the songs they played on that tour were from the Yes album, partly because they were Tony Kaye's on them, and also because I think Trevor Rabin found them the most not the easiest to play, because he could play anything, but the most the ones he wanted to play, let's say.
Yeah, it was a great show.
It was, yes, and I saw it as well in London, and I totally loved it. It probably stands up there as my favorite Yes show.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it ranks way up there for me too. And I saw it down literally blocks away from where I was born at the Los Angeles Forum. So that was always neat. And that's where I saw my very first Yes concert in 1978, Tormato in the Round. And it's also where I saw my very first concert, which was some flash in the pan band. You probably know, most people have not heard of Led Zeppelin, but I saw them first. It's funny when people post online, what was your first concert, and there's all these names, and I just write Led Zeppelin, have a good day.
Well, my first concert was Yes on the Tormato tour.
So, what's that? Nice.
And that was Yes on the Tormato tour, and that was at Wembley Arena, which is where I was on the 90125 tour as well. But the atmosphere was totally different at both those events. I loved the Tormato tour, but it was more, this is a prog audience. It's almost felt like a bit more of a recital, even though it was a great concert and things. It could have been because it was in the summer, but there was a charge in the atmosphere for the 90125. It was just, the whole atmosphere was different, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's because the audience was so different.
And I think also that, and it was kind of like the big return, like, we're here, give it to us, sort of a thing. It was interesting. And that stage, they had such a neat stage and everything. It was, the album is so modern, and the cover, and then you got that stage to go with it. It was just literally a complete package. Really was.
Yeah, it was very different. I mean, but the 80s were like that.
Yeah.
Up until the early 90s, those stage sets were really bare. You would never see an amp on those stage sets. If anybody's going to play a different instrument, it's way at the back, or a roadie's going to give it to them. The stage set is very designed, and it's very Spartan in many ways. All you see is the musicians playing their instruments. You might see a pedal board, obviously, but you won't see anything else on the stage in those many of those shows. And it was like that up until the Talk tour for Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
And then when you get into later on in the 90s, all of a sudden they're being, hey, we're musicians here. You can see my bass amp now.
Yeah.
It's just there.
Yeah.
So, but it was, you know, there were loads of bands that did that. That was the style of arena concerts in those days. I remember seeing Heart and Whitesnake and people like that, and they were all the same.
Yeah. And I like how we've talked about contradictions and stuff. I like that you begin the book with this statement saying that some of the accounts might be a little contradictory, but they're included so people can figure out the truth for themselves. And I really appreciate that approach, because it is interesting hearing how these guys remember things even slightly differently.
Yeah, I think there's always truth in there, and I don't think anybody's ever deliberately lying, probably, but sometimes they see things from their own perspective. And we all like to see ourselves in the best light. So sometimes you might exaggerate a story a little bit just so that you're seen as being in the best light. One of the ones that really struck me when I was putting the book together is the whole idea that Yes didn't have a recording contract. Cinema didn't have a recording contract for the entire recording process. So there's lots of stuff that I still don't know about. How did they manage the finances, all that? I know that Phil Carson was bankrolling it, but I don't know who was paying for the studio time, and when was it being paid? All that.
Yeah, I wondered about that too. That was interesting.
Yeah, and I do think having Phil Carson's perspective really adds something to this that other accounts I've heard of the album don't have. And so I never knew about the bankrolling stuff, and the lack of a contract is something I didn't really think about. So it's really surprising. And also how the 90125 logo, I think, was supposed to be the C in Cinema, and then they changed it. Like I don't remember knowing that.
Yeah,
that's out. That's information that's already out there, because it was I pulled a lot of that stuff from an interview with the artist, which was from 2015. So somebody actually asked me if I spoke to him myself, and I didn't. I probably could, if I was writing a longer book, I could probably have started talking to a lot of these people in a lot more detail. But I had all I needed really about the album cover, so I didn't talk to him. But yeah, I think the whole record, I think the whole not having a contract thing is important, because I think there's always an assumption with bands like Yes, so they've always got recording contracts. They've been around for years. But effectively, when they split up in 1981, that's when that recording contract with Atlantic went. There was no Yes for a while. So they needed to be re-signed by somebody, and Phil Carson was working on the assumption that they would be re-signed by Atlantic, or a subsidiary of Atlantic, ATCO in this case. But he knew that the hierarchy in Atlantic USA were not interested. They just didn't want to know. So Phil Carson is bankrolling this stuff on the basis that he will get it back one day, but it was very, very uncertain. I think this is why, in the end, John Anson ends up coming back. It's a commercial thing. It's like thing.
He really put himself out there. He must have really believed, and he was right, thank goodness. and they certainly delivered on that album. But I also like how you broke down the album, each song, and the way everything is sequenced and everything like that. So there's that treat for everybody, because everyone has their own perception of an album. Even if like two people like an album, they still might have different perceptions of certain things, like the sequences of songs and the different things like that. So I'd like that you have it in there for people to kind of contemplate and hear your perspective.
Yeah, and I think the sequencing is important. Somebody else asked me whether I thought that Cinema should have been up top, first track, because people often do that with instrumental songs. It starts the album, and I use the example of Child's Anthem by Toto, which is the first song on the first Toto album. I get that, but no, you hit them hard with the hit single.
Yeah.
Single's already been out, or just that single's out there and people are hearing it on the radio. So what do? You put it up front. But the way these albums sequenced is brilliant. I think it's brilliantly sequenced for vinyl,
Right.
specifically, not for, because it wasn't released on CD initially. It was released on CD quite soon, obviously, but it wasn't released on CD. At least I don't think it was. So yeah, that's really very important.
Yeah.
I give you a lot of detail about Owner of a Lonely Heart as well, which people may or may not want.
Well, I love how the book, at around 80 pages, it's a quick read. So it's concise, but it's still very much packed with all the information that feels necessary. One very well could make, I don't know, like a 200-page book about 90125 and really analyze all the stuff like to a T. But I feel like the way that this really boils down things in a digestible and yet very informative manner that really goes through the road to making the album, then the album itself, and then the tours and the legacy of the album live. And I think it does a brilliant job at that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was the intention. As I say, somebody will write a book about. Probably Kevin Mulrine will write a book about 90125, and we'll talk to everybody in detail, and there'll be loads of really sort of anarchy detail in there. But that's not what I was going for. I was going for more of a narrative, while still telling people as much as I could find out about, particularly how the albums came to be, because it's, on the face of it, is an incredibly contrived album. As you sort of hinted, Dan, at any point the album could have fallen apart. It has these 4 distinct phases.
Yeah.
And it might have fallen apart at any time, particularly right at the end. But it didn't. And each of these little phases makes the album better. When in case of some bands, it might have made the album worse. But every stage makes the album a little bit better. So yeah, it's important.
And then for those who don't know, there's also a nice, what I would refer to as like the postscript section that explains what happened after that. You do get into a bit of the Big Generator time and the 2-year project, and then talk and all of that. Gosh, you would think after 2 years, Big Generator would sound a lot better sonically. That always bothered me, the difference in production. We went from this beautiful, new, pristine sound to basically cardboard box, in my opinion. Not to insult anybody, but the difference sonically is just such a. And then back up again with talk. So I like how you included some additional information after the fact. That was key.
Yeah, well, I thought what I don't want, it's part of a series that talks about individual albums. And one of the temptations with talking about an individual album is to say too much about what happened before and say too much about what happened afterwards.
Right.
Because it's meant to be about the album. But I wanted to give some pertinent information about what happened later, particularly regarding Tony Kaye and Trevor Rabin, because and sort of that version of Yes. And kind of, you could argue the mistake of thinking, because obviously when they reconvened for talk, this came from, again, this was Phil Carson's doing. Phil Carson's assumption, I didn't speak to Phil about talk at all, but I think his assumption must have been, okay, what's the most commercially viable version of Yes? What's going to produce the best record sales? Let's go for the 90125 lineup. But that was arguably a mistake, because I think things have moved on and the time wasn't right for that, which is why talk didn't really sell very well at the time, and why the sort of the lineup sort of completely splintered after that, and Yes becomes this completely different thing again a year later. So yeah, it's important to give some of that perspective, but not too much. I think is an important thing. Yeah.
Right. And you also talked a bit about the Leave It music video, and we've had Kevin Godley on our show. I think that was last year, but yeah, how'd you feel like going through the whole Leave It of it all?
Oh,
Leave It library.
yeah, I haven't heard the Kevin. I must go back and listen to that actually, because that one passed me by. But the Leave It video was an amazing rabbit hole to go down, because I didn't know any of it, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who don't, because everybody's seen the Owner of a Lonely Heart video, like that incredibly
Yeah.
long, like 7
No one
minutes
can
long.
forget that video, for
Yeah.
better or worse.
Like 50, whatever it is, 50 million people have seen that video, but
Yeah.
way fewer people have seen the video for Leave It, and a much smaller number of people, including me, have never seen anything apart from version 11, which is the version that's on YouTube, and it's the version on Yes Video Hits. But the whole rabbit hole of that was that Yes deciding not to, I think it must have been a commercial thing as well as being going for a different style. So rather than spend huge, hundreds of thousands of dollars presumably on this sort of expansive narrative video that nobody understands, they then start Yes in the studio in New York for one day and recorded loads and loads of different versions of this this video that has the band upside down wearing grey suits, deliberately grey suits, to be as boring as possible.
Yeah.
And then what they then do with the videos, they record lots of different versions with lots of subtle and in some cases unsubtle differences. And the other thing I loved was the fact that you can see the band upside down, and the video's just been turned around, so they're upside down. The initial idea was that they would all be suspended upside down.
Right, that's great.
Now, I cannot believe that the band would have agreed to that. But the reason why it was actually scuppered was because Trevor Rabin had just had his spleen removed. So hanging him upside down was not thought to be a good idea. But they did make him jump up and down for one of the takes of the video. So
Yeah.
they still got him doing some quite physical stuff. But there's things like there's subtle differences. So there's one version that has Tony Kaye wearing a pink tie. That's the only difference. One version has Johansson only. There's a version that has all the band replaced by their instruments.
I remember that. Yeah. When Steve read it, was reading it, I remembered that. Yeah.
Well, I've never seen these versions. So, and there's a version apart from little clips of it in the making of video, which you can see on YouTube. There's a version, the best version, again, that I've never seen. They're in the studio for the whole day with quite a big crew. Kevin Godley and Lol Cream directing the whole thing. All the different versions are given really stupid, like Python-esque names, which is very, I can believe it, because these are, Godley and Cream. I don't know what Kevin Godley was like to interview, but they are quite dry, wry English guys with very British sense of humor. So
definitely get that vibe. Yeah.
Version 3 is called Tribute to Jeremy. I don't know who Jeremy is. Version 4 it's called Endless Infatuation. Version 5 is just called 4. Version 10 is called Lords of the Galaxy, and version 14 is called Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. Version 8 is called Surgeon's Dilemma. But also, sort of when they recorded all these versions, they went back into a studio and then they mixed them all up. So not only had they recorded 18 versions, they mixed various different bits of different versions into, so they became completely different versions. Yeah. But the best one is the one they recorded late in the day, where they asked the band to mime, because they're all miming to the song, basically. Asked the whole band to mime to the song with their backs to the camera.
Right.
So you can see them all miming, and there's a guy from MTV shooting it, and you can see the camera just pans around a little bit whilst they're shooting, and you can see them sort of kind of giggling to themselves as they attempt to mime this song when you can't see their mouths.
Yeah.
And also during the course of that that version, very quietly, Godley and Cream usher the entire crew out of the studio. So when they finished the version, they kind of, there's a bit of silence. They turn round and there's nobody there, apart from the guy from MTV. So you can, thankfully the band actually, as far as we can see, take it in reasonably good heart. You can hear what somebody, I think it's Tony Kaye saying, "Oh, I knew it." And the best one is John Anderson, who just says "beautiful," which is such a John Anderson thing to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
They start, you see the slip up. Sorry, you see them. Sorry, I just kicked on my microphone. You see the band kind of sitting in, just starting to mess around with the equipment and stuff, and then you see the crew all come back again, giggling to themselves.
Yeah.
And thankfully the band take it in good heart, considering it must have been a very grueling day, and people like Trevor Rabin didn't like doing that sort of thing in the first place. So let's face it, they hadn't done many videos, so
yeah,
it wasn't a bundle of fun for the guys in the first place. So but that whole thing, I knew nothing about that at all. I really probably wasn't watching MTV in 1984. So I didn't, and this was all on MTV USA as well. So I didn't see any of this kind of stuff. I didn't see them broadcasting all the videos. I had no idea. I knew the Leave It video existed, but I thought it was just that version 11 that's on that we see.
You might be in a little bit of hot water at the moment, because I see that in the comments there's some guy that you stole a couple of the pictures from for your book. Dave Watkinson's watching. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Dave. Yeah. No, chiming in. I asked permission.
Yeah, I was teasing. And thanks everyone else for chiming in from Sweden, Michigan, Australia, South Dakota, all over the place. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah. So regarding Sonic Bond Publishing, what else is coming out from there, whether it be Yes related or otherwise, just to give people an idea of what to look forward to?
We're still doing sort of 3 or 4 books a month. Now you'll ask me to remember stuff. Yes in the 90s by Simon Barrow will be out at some point. Yes, there it is. So there's a few more. I mean, this series, the Rock Classic series, there's certainly more coming up before the end of the year. We're doing, and they're quite varied. We've got it's probably out in the USA now. We've got Crime of the Century by Supertramp, written by Steve Pilkington. We've got Matt Karp is doing Californication by Red Hot Chili Peppers, for instance. So we've done Rolling albums by the Rolling Stones. We've got the White Album by the Beatles, which is out in the UK in August, so it should hit America in October.
I think I've heard of that album. Yeah. Sounds vaguely familiar.
We've actually done quite a good stack of on tracks as well. So we've just done first of 2 volumes on David Bowie. British listeners may be interested. We've just published Ultravox, which is selling really well in the UK. So the on track series continues, and we've just hit a fairly rich seam of quite high profile bands. We did a book on the Stranglers that sold very well in the UK. The on track. When I was last on, we were talking about my book in the on track series,
Yes, every album, every song.
Yeah, so that's in its second incarnation. That's continuing to do well. So the only book we've, as I say, Yes in the 90s is the only book we've got on Yes, I think, in the pipeline. I'm talking to Dave Watkinson about a couple of projects, but they're not finalized for anything, but they will be very Yes related when they if they appear. But yeah, no, we carry on. We publishing. Let's just think if there's anything else. We do a series called The Year In, and there's a few more of those in the pipeline for next year. So yeah, plenty of stuff. As I say, 3 or 4 titles a month, and I can't remember the names of any of them. I'm completely focused. I'm thinking yes, no, 95. People keep asking me if I'm going to do another one on another Yes album, and the answer is yeah, I might do, but it would have to be something I can offer something new about and that would sell. So the album I've been researching recently, because again I've done an article for Prog magazine about it, is Talk, but I think because it's not such a well-known album, I think that I would be dubious about how well that would sell if I did it. And I think there's less to say about it as well. There's an awful lot more from Trevor Rabin, an awful lot less from other things, although from other people. So I don't think that would be such an interesting read somehow. So yeah, I probably won't do that. The next book I'm meant to be doing in the series, believe it or not, is about the Jesus Christ Superstar album, the original 1971. But I haven't, and I've sort of started that, but I haven't written much of it. So if that comes out, it'll be next year, late next year, I would have thought.
So would it include interviews or bits from Ian Gillan?
It might do.
Okay.
Actually, it has the benefit of having had a huge amount written about and spoken about already.
Yeah.
So what I would need to work out is whether I need to speak to more people about it, or whether I can piece it together. I mean, Lloyd Webber's written a huge amount about it. Tim Rice has written a huge amount about it. Ian Gillan said a lot about it. And let's face it, he was in the studio for 2 days recording his parts for that, I think.
Yeah.
I have done an analysis of the religious aspects of it, not because I'm particularly religious myself, but because how it matches up to what's said about those incidents in the Bible is quite interesting, actually.
Yeah.
So those are bits I have done, but it's actually discussing the album in a lot more detail I haven't got onto yet. So yeah, so possibly not. It may never see the light of day. I need to be. I've got a few ideas for books of my own as well, but I haven't really. They haven't really polarized into anything specific yet.
Yeah. I think with Yes and these other bands and artists you've mentioned, with such large histories, whether it be a band history or the history of an album, there's so much getting into the weeds that one can go. And I feel like Talk has had such a resurgence, so there would be maybe a niche audience for that, but I do understand it's like a balancing act. Like, okay, which book might do better, what has more info on it, and whatnot. And so, but whenever there is something out there, it can make a fascinating read.
Yeah.
I think it's I think there was a Close to the Edge focus book a while ago, perhaps, and it's kind of funny that we got Kevin's Tormato book before getting this 90125 book, which was a more successful album. But Tormato is also like a very niche topic, I guess you would say, and like there are audiences on either end of the spectrum, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, somebody said to me yesterday, "Why don't you do Tomato?" And my answer was, "Well, Kevin Mulrine's already done it in way more detail than I could ever do." I mean, that's a brilliant book, and he's doing Tales from Topographic Oceans right now.
Yeah, the listening guide. Yeah,
is that by Yes?
Yeah, it's a little.
Yeah, it's one of their very obscure albums. Like, not many prog fans know about it.
Yeah. So. And I'm sure he will get on to 90125 later, and he will talk to everybody who was involved in it. In fact, actually, one of the things we are going to be publishing, this came from Kevin. We're doing a book which it took some time to arrive at a title, but we're doing a book by a guy called Peter Woolliscroft, who was one of the recording. I think he was tape operator during the Tormato sessions.
Oh.
And then he went on. So that's how he got to know Kevin. And he then went on to be quite a successful sort of recording engineer in the 80s and worked with Trevor Horn and loads of different bands. And so he's written a kind of memoir of that time. So we're publishing that in the autumn.
Nice.
And he came. The contact with him came from Kevin, because he'd spoken to him about his work on Tomato, and the Tomato will be in that book as well.
Oh, nice.
So that's, yeah, we're doing that. In fact, I'm trying to do a lot more books that are, not series based, if possible.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
So, folks, get the book. It is
Yeah.
so good. It really is.
It's on Burning Shed. People can order it there.
Yep.
A signed copy, go to Burning Shed. I think the stock has arrived in the USA, and the book's been released to the bookstores, but I think it's formally published in September. I tend to leave it up to the distributors to decide where to publish things in the USA. So I think it's formally published in September, but the actual, but I think it hopefully will start arriving with people fairly soon. Anyway, so
great. Here's a comment I'd like to show that just popped in from Robert Ness. He says, given Yes fans legendary fractiousness, I especially appreciate the book and this discussion. Thank you very much, Robert. A potent reminder that Yes is nothing if not multifaceted, and that's a good thing. Thanks, guys. Yeah, thank you very much for that. And that is so true. That's so well said.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It's people. I know Yes fans can sometimes be a little bit tunnel visioned.
Yeah,
but that's a very good comment. Yeah,
and there's so much in their discography that is so different that there really is something for everybody, and they really proved that with this album that the book is about. That just opened up to whole new audiences, as we talked about. So that's very true.
Yeah. Great. No, I think it's a great album, and I think I think there's a lot of some Yes fans don't like it. A lot of Yes fans do, but I love it.
And there's some people that this introduced them to Yes that will hear Close to the Edge and go, what kind of bad acid went around that day? And it just won't resonate with them, and that's okay.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Stay on the line with us as we will say goodbye to everybody. We appreciate everybody chiming in, whether you watched us just now live or whether you just now watched us on the archive. We appreciate it very much. Simulcasting on the Yesshift channels and Drum Talk TV as well. And we will be back soon with more fun on Yesshift and Drum Talk TV. Thanks, everybody, so much.